Nice to see you all here after vacation. And I hope you are all well. Thank you for being here today. This is the first webinar in 2022, the third year of GeFam webinar series. I am Lorena Hakak, and together with Ana Luisa Yolanda Barbosa, we are going to mediate this webinar. If you have any questions, you can send it through the Zoom chat, or you can turn on your microphone and feel free to ask. Today, we are pleased to welcome Barbara Boelmann. She will present her paper, Wind of Change, Cultural Determinants of Maternal Labor Supply. Shall we get better to know our guest? Barbara is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Cologne. She's an associated member of Contribute and a member of CSEB and the Collaborative Research Center of Transradio 224. She's an applied labor economist, and she studies the structural factors underlying inequalities on the labor market with a focus on gender inequalities. She has obtained her PhD from University College London and CREAM in 2022. She holds a master's and a bachelor in economics and Chinese studies in her BA too, both from the Ruhr University of Bochum. I don't know if it's correct to say that. Hi, Barbara.
Hello.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Yes, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay, when you're ready, you feel free to begin.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks. I'm very excited. This is also my first presentation in 2022. So I think it's a great way to kick off the year. I think I'm having a little bit trouble like monitoring the chat as well. So please, if you feel comfortable, just interrupt me. But I'll try to keep an eye out. Maybe Lorena can remind me when there are questions in the chat as well. So this paper is joint work with Anna Raute from Queen Mary's University in London and Uta Schönberg, also from UCL in London. So let's begin by a very simple notion, which is that women, and in particular mothers, work less than observationally similar men. And this paper studies the cultural determinants of maternal labor supply. So from the existing literature, we know two facts. The first is the persistence of culture and deep historical roots of these kind of differences in labor supply of men and women. But secondly, also, we have seen in recent years some episodes of sudden change in gender norms and associated female labor supply. And so these kind of two facts then kind of naturally lead to the question, when does culture persist and when does it change? And in this paper, we focus on two particular sub-questions, which is first, do migrants who go to a different culture adhere to their childhood culture in which they were raised? Or do they adjust to the new current culture? So how persistent is the childhood culture a person was raised in? And then secondly, we turn to the experience of the people in the host country themselves. And we ask the questions, can migrants from a more gender egalitarian culture induce a change in behavior in the natives from a more gender traditional culture? So we first look at the experience of migrants themselves, looking at the persistence of gender norms and associated behavior. And then we look at the experience of the host country and see how malleable the gender norms in the host country are by a migration shock. So let me be very precise what we have in mind when we talk about childhood culture and current culture. So with childhood culture, we really mean, does the culture of a woman, does the culture in which a woman grew up influences her return to work decisions after childbirth? And that is obviously linked to the concept of vertical transmission of culture across generations. And here we take a very broad stance. So this can be within the immediate family, also within a broader social network, such as friends and neighbors, or even larger society as a whole. So the schools or the kind of media you were exposed to when growing up. And then with current culture, we mean, can a different culture in adulthood shape the maternal labor supply as well? And that is linked to the concept of horizontal transmission of cultural traits through social interactions within a peer group, which could be neighbors or co-workers and so on. And here we see the potential of migration as a driver of cultural change. So let me give you a little bit of the flavor of the setting that we're using, and then I'll explain it in more detail later. So we're exploiting the unique setting of the German division and then unification. So after World War II, Germany was divided into two parts. East Germany was a state socialist country which encouraged full-time labor force participation of mothers. West Germany, on the other hand, was propagated a more traditional male breadwinner model. And so in 1989, which is just before reunification, the female labor force participation in the East was 89%, compared to 56% in the West. So huge differences in the female labor force participation between those two parts of the country. Then reunification happened quite suddenly in 1989. And those two cultures, the East and West German culture, were suddenly thrown together. And importantly, East Germany took over all of West German's institutions. So we had the same institutional setting everywhere after reunification. And also large-scale migration happened. And it's those migration flows which we will be exploiting in the analysis, which meant then, of course, that there were increased social interactions between East and West Germans. And so looking at these interactions, just repeating what we do so we are all on the same page, we first focus on the experience of the migrants themselves, so people who migrated from East to West or from West to East, and see how persistent is their respective childhood culture. And then secondly, we go to the traditional West Germany and look what happens to the West German natives when they get East German colleagues. Can this change a behavior of the kind of native West Germans? And this is the sneak peek of our results. So we find a large symmetry in the persistence of childhood culture. West Germans behave like East Germans when they are exposed to this less traditional culture. However, East Germans, coming from this more gender egalitarian background, adhere to their less traditional culture and do not adapt to the West German standard. And we will provide some evidence that learning is a likely channel for this asymmetry. And then turning to the second question, we showed that migration can be a vehicle for cultural diffusion. And East German migrants in a firm speed up the return to work of West German mothers. Okay, great. So let me give you a little bit more background on the history of Germany. So this is a map of Germany, and you see the two parts here that after World War II, Germany was divided in. So in 1945, after World War II, the Allied occupation zone, the blue zone, became then West Germany, and the Soviet zone, the red zone, became East Germany. And East Germany then became a state socialist country, whereas West Germany followed the American kind of capitalist way. And gender norms evolved quite differently during the time. And I'd like to highlight this with an advertisement from the 1950s. Okay, we can have this first. Sorry, I thought I switched the order, but I will show you the details first and you have to wait for the advertisement then. So in the GDR, which is the former Soviet zone, East Germany, as the state socialist country, it promoted equality of women and men, and this was even a state proclaimed goal of the government. In addition, it propagated the duty to work for everybody. And to do that, they implemented a lot of family-friendly policies, such as the baby year, 1 year fully paid maternity leave, but then importantly, also widespread childcare availability. So it was both this kind of like social pressure that everybody should work, but then also this high childcare availability, which allowed a high labor force participation of mothers in the former East. Then in the former West, on the other hand, we had this more conservative male breadwinner model. And so the whole system deterred mothers from working or working full-time. There was a lack of childcare, and also the tax system, for example, benefited single earner families. For example, a spouse could be insured for free, and there's joint taxation and so on. All these things really preferred single earner families. And so that meant that women often stayed home after they had a child, or they would only return to part-time work after an extended leave. Okay, and here's the ad that I promised to kind of show that this was really also deeply rooted in the culture then. So here's the advertisement from West Germany for a baking product. And we see that there's the mother, she's wearing an apron, she's just made this cake, and her husband wearing a suit just came home from work. And she says, our baking is so much fun using this product. Okay, but of course, the kind of gender norms that we see here are very traditional. Then a contemporary advertisement from the East is showing a little girl. She's heating up a ready-made meal. And if you look in the background, you see a watch on the wall, and it's 10 to 5 in the afternoon. And the caption says, "Mom is coming home in 10 minutes. So this is, of course, a very different idea of what mothers should do during the day, right? And so this just illustrates how different those two kinds of countries were. And then reunification happened quite suddenly in 1989, and formally Germany was unified in 1990. And so, as I said before, all the West German institutions were kind of also put to East Germany. So we had the same institutions everywhere, including maternity leave legislation and so on. And there were many commuter and migration flows, which we use in the analysis. Oh, I think there's something in the chat. How much of the effect comes from new offer of East German care work in the West? Do you mean how much of the migrants came to care in West Germany? Sorry, Anna, do you want to? I mean, maybe I can, Anna, I mean, you feel free to interrupt me, but maybe I can answer more generally at this point. Yeah, so that is a good point. A lot of the migration was obviously for work reasons. And so this is, of course, after reunification in the East, we saw quite an economic downturn, right? And so many people lost their jobs, and also many migrated to get a job in the West. So this is definitely one of the biggest drivers of migration that we see. Yeah, I mean, I hope this answers the questions. Otherwise, Anna, interrupt me. And here are attitudes towards working mothers 18 years after reunification. So quite a long time after reunification. And this comes from the European Value Survey, where people are asked, do you agree that a preschool child suffers if their mother works? And you see West Germany is up here with almost 60% agreeing, yes, a child suffers, or a preschool child suffers if their mother works. And this is quite conservative along like other European conservative countries such as Austria and Italy. Whereas West Germany here has the rate only half of those of West Germans agreeing. And this is much more similar to, for example, the UK. So even almost 20 years after unification, people have very different ideas about the role of mothers of small children. Okay. This was the kind of historical background. Let me just check the time, great, that I wanted to give to you. So here's the data that we are using, and Lorena and I have already chatted a little bit. You have similar cool data, even cooler data in Brazil, but we can also use German Social Security records for our project, and we have a 50% random sample of all women employed who were born between these years. And what is great about the data is that you also have the complete daily employment history for each woman, and you see their leave of absence due to childbirth, and that's how we identify that they got a child. And we also have firm, or rather establishments, but I will just call it firm identifiers to explore the social interactions at the workplace. And we have a separate data set which gives us the yearly full population of the firm, and so we know all of a woman's colleagues once a year, basically. And here in this paper, we focus on labor markets transitions after first birth. And we focus on women who gave birth between 2003 and 2006. So these mothers were born in the mid to late 1970s. And so they made a lot of their education and importantly labor market decisions after reunification. So these are not like the immediate migrants that we see directly after reunification, but people who migrate later. Yeah. So why do we focus on transition around the first birth? So first of all, from this vast literature on child penalties, we know that child penalties are the key drivers of gender inequality in the developed world these days. And so looking at what drives child penalties is interesting in itself. Then also from this mummy effect paper, we know that gender norms are particularly salient around childbirth. Women do not have a good idea about the costs of childbirth before they become mothers. And so if we want to compare gender norms between East and West Germans, this seems to be the relevant margin here. And from a kind of methodological point of view, this allows us to condition on an extensive set of pre-birth characteristics, which is just at birth and also the employment history up to 3 years prior to childbirth. And that means throughout the analysis, we will always compare women who were on the same career trajectory before birth, and then see what happens when this kind of birth shock hits them and all these gender norms become very salient. Okay, here are some what we think are interesting descriptors. So this is the transition to work after childbirth for East and West Germans. So on the x-axis, you see the months after childbirth, ranging from the child just being born to the child turning 7. And on the y-axis, you see the share of mothers who has returned to regular employment. And the dashed line is East Germans and the solid line is West Germans. And that's just, pulling all East Germans and all West Germans and getting this descriptive graph here. And you can see that East Germans return after 1 year, which is also the old institutional norm of East Germany, where you had 1 year of this baby leave, basically. West Germans, on the other hand, do not return at the same rate after 1 year. You see after 2 years, again, more East Germans are returning. This is when in 2003, maternity leave payments end. So this is really a financial incentive to return here, but still West Germans, they only return after 3 years. You see a significant jump here in people who return after 3 years, which is when the job protection ends at the time. So at this time, 2003, you had either 1 or 2 years of paid benefits. So you could decide, and then you would get a bit more, a bit less monthly. And then you had job protection up to 3 years. And that's also what we see here, that people react differently to those kind of institutional incentives in East and West Germany. But even 7 years after childbirth, so when the child is already in school, we still see a difference of maybe like around 15 percentage points. So these are really persistent differences. And if you translate that into the child penalty that I've been talking about here, it's basically the same kind of graph, but instead of having the share return, you now have the percent of the pre-birth wages that women recover. And you see that 7 years after 7 years after the child was born, there is still a 20% gap in the wages that East and West German women recover. So these are really big financial consequences that come with this differential return behavior. But we know that that kind of like why the child penalty is so different is due to labor supply decisions. And that's why for the rest of the talk, I will only show you results for labor supply decisions. But just that you know, this translates, of course, to child penalties as well. Let me just check the time. I need to hurry up a little bit. Here again, I plot for you the graph, and once with controls and once without controls. And I think the point here, and maybe I can be a bit brief, is that really including those individual controls at the time of birth, which are like occupation fixed effects and education, pre-birth wages, and so on, they don't really shrink the East-West gap. So it doesn't seem to be driven by different characteristics of East and West Germans here. But I will talk a little bit more about that later. So of course, East and West Germany is still different along many dimensions. For example, labor markets are different in both parts of the country. So as the kind of final step in our descriptive analysis, we just focus on those red labor markets here. So these are local labor markets defined as commuting zones, so actual commuting behavior. But they comprise both parts of the country. So for each of those labor markets, we have an East German part and a West German part, but they are tightly connected through commuting flows. And so, of course, if we only compare women within those labor markets, we can hold constant a lot of the differences that we do have between East and West Germany. And also, we allow for more interactions between East and West Germans because, well, they commute and they meet each other. And so looking at how the East-West gap evolves over time, on the left-hand side within those cross-border local labor markets, and on the on the right-hand side for the rest of Germany, you see that in those cross-border local labor markets, the East-West gap shrinks much more over time from 1994 to 2006, whereas for overall Germany, we hardly see a change over this period. And so from this descriptive analysis, what we take away is that on the one hand, this East-West gap appears to be persistent, so gender norms seem to be quite sticky. But on the other hand, if we have social interactions, there is also a scope for change. And we want to dig a little bit deeper now in the proper analysis of the paper. And so let's start with the first strategy, which is looking at movers, comparing East Germans in West Germany with West Germans. And this is asking the question, how persistent is childhood culture when moving to a new culture? And here we compare East Germans who migrated to the West to those native West German mothers. And we always do so within the same labor market and even within the same workplace. Again, we focus on the birth years 2003 to 2006. And so this captures the experience of migrants themselves. So how persistent is the effect of a less traditional childhood culture when you are fully immersed to a more traditional culture as a minority during adulthood? So of course, again, local labor market opportunities and the firm environment are held constant. And also this means there are no differences in childcare availability. I get that question a lot from Germans because still today, childcare rates are higher in East Germany than in West Germany. But here we are comparing people in the same firm and same local labor market in West Germany, so they have access to the same kind of childcare.
Barbara,
yes.
could you repeat what you said about childcare? I missed. Sorry.
No, that's a kind of like very German question that I get a lot, which is today childcare availability in East Germany is still much higher than in West Germany, which of course makes sense because demand is also very different in either side of the country. But of course that's problematic in the descriptive analysis, which I showed you. This might be partly driven by the availability of childcare, right? And here in this analysis now, we only compare women in the same local labor market and in the same firm, all in West Germany. So they have the same availability of childcare. So whatever differences we see cannot be due to the different availability of childcare, basically. Yeah. And we will talk a little bit about the selection of migrants, of course, but let's first show you the real first results to use. So here across the columns, basically we add more and more controls. And our preferred specification is column 4, where we have the tightest control set and we compare women within the same firm. And the main outcome that I will be focusing on today is whether or not a mother is regularly employed, so not in marginal employment, but in regular employment 4 years after childbirth. So we chose 4 years because kindergarten in Germany starts after at age 3, by the latest then 3.5 or whatever, it's always with a cutoff date. So 4 years after childbirth, really almost all children, like I think more than 90% of the children are enrolled in kindergarten. So it should be possible to have regular employment if your child goes to kindergarten. And so any differences are really not due to childcare here. And we see that East German women in the same workplace as West German women are 8 percentage points more likely to be regularly employed 4 years after childbirth. And so this indicates that this East German, less traditional, more egalitarian culture is very sticky because now they are in this West German traditional environment, but they still return to work earlier.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
What do you mean about marginal employment?
So this is not marginal employment. So marginal employment is, we call it the so-called mini job. That's what the Germans call it. And it's basically a job that allows you to work up to 450 euros a month. So this would be maybe around 10 hours per week, more or less. And so you don't pay social contributions, and so you don't pay into your pension funds, and so it's really not a regular employment. And so many mothers return to regular employment, but this is not really advancing their careers, helping them build up their pensions and so on. So we think looking at regular employment is really an interesting outcome here. But if you look at the line below, which is employed, basically you have you also have those people returning into marginal employment, and we see the gap shrinks. So West Germans are more likely to return to this marginal employment than East Germans. Yeah. Okay. Let me just quickly check the time. Great. So of course, you're working on similar topics, so you will always thinking like, but these migrants, are they selected? Like, what can we do about the selection of migrants here, right? And we try to do a lot. And you can tell us maybe you have some other interesting ideas. The first thing which I already showed to you is that this inclusion of various and really important controls for female labor supply firms, right? We know firms matter, we know occupations matter, we know pre-birth wages matter, we know education levels matter, right? We know that from the literature, and we can include all of those and they don't change the results. So anything that's correlated with those, we should at least partly capture here, and it doesn't seem to drive the differences. Then, of course, you wonder, what about like work-related attitudes? And I already said, well, a lot of the migration was for work, right? So are these people who care more about their careers? Unfortunately, with the administrative data, we can't ask them directly. But there's another data set, the socio-economic panel. And in that, people are asked, like, do you care how important is career for you? How important is family for you? Full disclosure, the sample size is small here. That's why we can't use it for the proper analysis. But looking at descriptives from this data set seems to indicate that the East German migrants are not different from the East German stayers. So hopefully they are not crazily selected in terms of those work-related attitudes. Similarly, spousal income could be important, right? And unfortunately, we can't link couples in our data. So we don't know whether they're married and what's their partner's income. Again, we turn to the socioeconomic panel data here, and there is some gap. However, the spousal income differences are too small to explain the entire gap, which we saw of this 8%. So this is not the entire driver. Then you might think there is a general migration effect. For example, it's just one of the channels of the migration effect, that if you migrate away from home, you don't have a family network that can support you. So this might be a problem, right? So what we do to kind of capture this general migration effect is we use West German internal migrants as an alternative comparison group. So these people migrated as much as these East Germans who came to West Germany, but they migrated within West Germany. So they are still exposed to this more traditional norm that they grew up in, but they don't have a family network, and they had the similar kind of migration experience, and the results are robust to that. We also restrict our analysis to only those 5 integrated local labor markets that span both parts of the border, because here a lot of these interactions are commuting and not moving. And so these people had lower moving costs or no moving costs, they just commute. And also that works. And then the final exercise that we do is we apply the bounds suggested by Emily Oster, building on the Atonji bounds. And here you basically assume extreme differences between East and West Germans, based on, we know the selection on observables. And then you think how much should be the selection on unobservables compared to the selection on observables. And we compute the bound saying selection on unobservables may be as large as selection on observables. We know we have very important observables here. And so basically you allow the unobservables to estimate as much as the observables, and you see what kind of bounds you get for your estimate. And those bounds still give us the main results. And if we have time in the end, I'm also happy to show you more, but I want to show you the main results first. But these are kind of like the robustness checks we do about selection of migrants, and these at least work. So that's what I can tell you. To give you a little bit of a sense of the estimates in the literature, so these 8% that we saw as the East-West gap, they are comparable to the effect of having a working mother, or to the difference in employment between college-educated and non-college educated mothers in the US and the UK. So it's quite substantial gap here. Okay, great. So let's look at people moving in the opposite direction. So let's look at West Germans going to the East. And so the question here is the West German culture as persistent as the East German one? So again, we compare West Germans who migrated to East Germany to native East German mothers within the same East German local labor market and workplace. And here are our main results. Again, our preferred specification is column 4, which compares people in the same firm with the tightest control set that we have. And you see there is hardly any difference between West Germans in East Germany and native East Germans. And if you go to column 5, which looks at West Germans who have been in East Germany for a long time, which is what we call long-term migrants, this difference even gets smaller. So this gap really is a lot smaller than the gap in West Germany, which seems to suggest that these West Germans somewhat adjust to the East German culture that they migrated to, especially after long exposure. Again, we do the same kind of robustness checks here, and they also work. I don't think I have to go through them again. One extra thing that we can do here, because the data allows that, is that we can look at future West-East migrants. So we compare people who give birth in West Germany to West Germans, to other West Germans who also give birth. But some of them will migrate to East Germany in the future, and some of them will migrate within West Germany in the future. So these are all people who want to migrate, but if those people who go to the East are somewhat selected on career variables because they want to go to the East, because they know in the East it's easier to be a mother and work, we should already pick that up while they are in West Germany, because they should be different, right? Already at that point in time, and we don't see that. That's the kind of new extra test that we can do here. But the others are the same, so I will not explain more detail for now. So we have seen East Germans stick to their less traditional childhood culture, whereas West Germans deviate from their more traditional childhood culture when they are in the East. And so this is the asymmetric adjustment that I mentioned in the beginning. And so what can explain this asymmetric adjustment? It could be peer pressure, for example, from East German colleagues, together with the economic incentives of returning early. That could also be learning from colleagues. So West German mothers, for example, could be uncertain about the effects of maternal employment, and they could learn some important information from their East German environment. And likewise, there could be a change in preference and identity for West German women. And those last two channels we broadly label learning here, okay? And the only thing that we try to do is to differentiate it from this first point here, which is peer pressure. And we do so by looking at West German return migrants. So these are people who previously migrated to the East, then return to the West and give birth in the West. And the question is, do West German women adjust their behavior even after past exposure to the East? Okay, so again, this compares West German return migrants with past exposure to the East with West German colleagues who always remained in the West. And so this captures the effect of past full immersion to a less traditional culture. And we want to differentiate this kind of like broad learning that I explained from peer pressure at the workplace. And here are the main results. Again, column 4 is our preferred specification. And you see that those West German return migrants are around 4 percentage points more likely to be regularly employed 4 years after childbirth than West German stayers who always stayed in West Germany. So the past exposure to the less traditional culture matters. And so this, of course, cannot be peer pressure because they are not in the East German environment anymore. It rather seems to suggest that they took something permanent away from East Germany. For example, information about the consequences of being a working mother, or some practical tips on how to actually combine work and family, and so on.
Barbara,
Oh,
can
yeah.
I ask you something? Maybe
Yes.
you probably you said, but I missed. These women, they migrate to East German, they return to West German. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Does it make sense? Yeah.
Yes. Can I ask you something else? Is there a difference in income or in the education between Eastern and Western German women?
Yeah, definitely in income. So if you look at on average, kind of between East and West Germany, not only women but also men, just East Germans earn a lot less in nominal terms. We don't have very good, like regional price indices, but we know prices are also a bit lower in the East, but I can't really quantify it very well. So in nominal terms, there's huge income difference between East and West. And then in terms of selection of those migrants, right, that's what we are interested in. So we want to know how much more positively selected are, for example, East Germans going to West compared to East Germans staying in East. There's somewhat of a positive selection. So they're a bit more highly educated and earning a bit more as well. And the same also for people who go from West to East. Exactly. But then here in this analysis, when we compare within the same local labor market, we also always compare people with the same pre-birth wage, right? We control for pre-birth wages. And so at least to some extent, we should be able to take care of the effect that they had different pre-birth earnings. Yeah, that's an important question. Okay, so great. So I have like a bit more than 10 minutes to tell you about our last piece of evidence, which looked at the arrival of East German colleagues in West German firms. And so the question here is, does horizontal transmission of culture also happen with moderate exposure? What we saw so far was on full exposure, like migrating to a different country. Is that really necessary? Or can you also change your norms by more moderate exposure? And to do that, imagine, first of all, before reunification, before 1989, no West German mother was exposed to East German colleagues because, well, Germany was divided. Okay, so at that point, nobody had East German colleagues. That's our pre-period. And then after reunification, we saw this large first migration wave that I told you about, the East Germans coming to West Germany for work. And that mainly happened between 1989 and 1991. That was the main migration wave. And so from that, we identified two types of firms. The first is what we call the treated firms, which experienced a particularly large inflow of East Germans, more than 10% of their total workforce after this migration period was East Germans. And then we also identified controlled firms, which hardly had any inflow, less than 0.5% of the East Germans, of their workforce were East Germans. And so we exploit this differential inflow of East Germans across smaller firms in a difference in differences design. So continuous differences in differences design, with 86 to 88 being our before period and 92 to 96 being our after periods. So this captures the exposure to less traditional peers in this own more traditional environment of West Germans. So this is the effect on natives in the host country. And that's, of course, similar to the peer effects literature that we know of maternal employment, for example, looking at the effect of neighbors. And there are also two contemporaneous papers also looking at immigration and culture, but using somewhat different strategies here. So what are the confounding factors that we have in mind? Of course, first you wonder, I mean, it shouldn't be random where these East German women go to, right? They will maybe go, or probably go to, growing local labor market and growing industries. So we can have local labor market year fixed effects and industry year fixed effects, taking away and all those concerns about, do they select into growing labor markets, growing industries, or do they also induce a change in the local labor market, for example, right? They themselves could have a migration effect in the local labor market. We can take care of that with those effects. Then still you wonder, why did some East German firms why did some West German firms hire East Germans and some didn't, right? And so you probably think that our treatment firms are firms that grew a lot, whereas our control firms didn't, and so that puts them on a different trajectory, and that is true. So if we just look at the growth over the whole period, we specifically see that intuition, that treatment firms grow during this migration period, 1989 to 1991, whereas control firms don't grow. So what do we do about this? So first of all, again, we rely on the richness of the data, and we include a lot of time-changing firm characteristics just before a mother gives birth and at the time when we measure whether she has returned or not, such as the share of migrants, the wages, full-time equivalent, and so on. Then we also define an alternative control group, which experienced the same employment growth during the migration wave, but not by East Germans, and that also works. And we also have placebo regressions where we look at career trajectories of men and older women and show that these are not affected by the inflow of East Germans. So all of these kind of ease the concerns that there's something going on that the firm overall is growing and I don't know, pressuring women to return, giving them better money to return. I don't know. So this doesn't seem to be the case. At least we don't see it for careers for men and older women. Okay, so here are the main results. Again, we have the different control sets here added over the columns. And the main outcome here is, again, whether the mother is employed regularly 4 years after childbirth. And you see that East German colleagues, sorry, I moved around the window with you guys. This is always the problem in Zoom, right? So you can see that West German women in their native West German environment are more likely to be regularly employed 4 years after childbirth. In particular, a 10 percentage point increase in the share of East Germans increases the probability of being in regular employment by 1.6 percentage points, right? And this is through part-time employment. You don't see a lot happening on full-time employment here. And then, so we also looked at that 1 year after childbirth. And I brought it up here because you see the effect is larger after 1 year, 1 year after childbirth. And so that's precisely the old East German norm, which is interesting. So West German women are now more likely to return 1 year after childbirth, also full-time, but also in regular employment in general. So they return earlier by their East German colleagues. So I told you that we said we define control groups in a way that they have to have at least a 10 percentage point migration shock, and we did so because we had a more flexible analysis here where we allowed firms to have only 5% of East German employees, and then we split up the treatment firms into 5 quintiles and plotted the effect here, and each quintile has the effect plotted on the mean migration share. And you can see that it's really only after 10% of the total workforce being East German that this workplace peer effect kicks in. So the takeaway from this graph here is that really you need a large migration shock at the workplace so that this kind of transmission works. Okay, let me check the time. That's great. So I would just summarize here. So we have seen evidence for horizontal spillovers through migration. 1 year after childbirth, treated mothers are more likely to have returned to work and full-time work. And 4 years, treated mothers are more likely to be working, and also, which I haven't shown you, but which we have in the paper, they are more likely to stay with the same pre-birth employer, and also more likely to stay in their same career, meaning being in the same firm and job. We've seen that there is a large threshold effect, so substantial migration shock is needed. And what I haven't shown you, but which I think is at least worth mentioning briefly, is that we find heterogeneous spillovers. So female colleagues and immediate peers working in the same work group with the mother have a stronger effect on the return behavior of West German mothers. And that makes, of course, a lot of sense because they are more likely to transmit this firsthand experience, which we think triggers this kind of learning that we saw in the West German return migrants. So together, the arrival of those more progressive peers affects West German mothers' maternal labor supply, but the exposure needs to be substantial. Okay, so let me quickly summarize this long paper. So we have seen an asymmetry when cultures interact. For East Germans, their less traditional childhood culture is persistent. For West Germans, the exposure to less traditional culture in adulthood positively and permanently affects their maternal labor supply. And we've shown that learning is a key driver of this asymmetry. And then the second set of results shows that migration can bring about cultural change. So full immersion is not needed for this transmission of culture to occur, but you still need a substantial shock, at least 10 percentage points at the workplace. And this also shows that workplaces are important social networks for cultural change, which I think are still a bit understudied, and we have discussed that before. So hopefully there are more papers on that. And so going back to the introduction, looking at those child penalties and women working less, and in particular mothers working less. So one reason for why we still see those persistent motherhood penalties in gender traditional cultures might be the lack of direct contact to more gender egalitarian cultural values and beliefs. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I think, yes, that was okay in time, I hope.
Thank you very much, Barbara. We can open for questions. Thank you very much. This working paper, it's very, very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a long time though.
It's interesting that it's not only the migration shock that is important, but the percentage of the number of the migration, the migrants in the firm, because this last exercise you compare people from firms, treated and non-treated. So okay. Okay, and then mothers that they work in firms that they had more than 10 percentage points migration, new migrants from East German. They have a higher probability to be working after childbirth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if it's less, we don't find a significant effect if it's like 5% or around that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So we need to shake the culture.
The world.
Yes, the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's still something relatable, right? I mean, just that you have direct contact with people at your workplace. They tell you about their experiences or experiences of friends, and so it makes sense to me that you then are reassured, or you get some tips of what you can do. It kind of opens up a whole new option set of what you previously never thought was possible, right? So I guess the term learning that we use here is very broad in the sense of, I don't want to say it's just, one information, but I think it makes sense that you kind of want to have those role models, if you want to use that term here.
Yes, and I think I think one of the contributions is not the two main contributions that I was thinking about. It's that you have the horizontal
and the vertical
and vertical transmission. This is very interesting, and it's very difficult to show.
Mechanism. Yes, both cultural mechanism.
Yeah,
the horizontal because of the migration, and the vertical because of the childhood.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, and I think that the cultural and the social norms began with you show the literature review, the Fernandez paper. I think it began with these papers about the generation transmission, 2013, something like that. And now the migration mechanism is boom, like, and this is interesting, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bizine and Verdier also.
Exactly.
Yes.
Do you want me to stop sharing the screen so I can see you better?
Okay. No. Okay.
Yeah, I can go back if you want to see some particular result.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're so small.
Is there any questions?
I think Ana Abras has just one question. I just want before I pass to her. I just have one, and about it's not a question, it's just like a comment about household production, and it has a link to what Ana Abras is gonna say. It's about care work, household production. You don't, I think it's very difficult to have information or data regarding to women. You have only information about the labor market. But it would be very interesting if you had information about, when you showed the two charts about East and West German, it would be very interesting to have these statistics, because because it will be the statistics and the information regarding the two charts, right? Like the breadwinner regarding the East and the more than regarding the West German. It would be really nice. I think it will be the whole history.
No, you're right. So we don't know from our data, but we know from like other sources basically that the East was a really heavy double burden for women. So they still did all the housework and all the childcare, apart from like the external public childcare that they could use. So basically, they had two jobs. So at least anecdotally, that's also what we hear, but I don't have good numbers on that, but anecdotally, that's also what we hear from East Germany today. So by no means East Germany is a society with like complete gender equality, where men also do like the housework. We also have a gender wage gap, by the way, in East Germany, also during the time of division. Even though East German women have better qualifications, are more likely to be in MINT and so on, we still have a gender wage gap, and we still have this unequal division of household production, basically. So, and especially when I talk to East Germans, they sometimes get angry that I don't emphasize it enough, because they're like, you're making it sound a paradise, which it clearly wasn't in all dimensions. Here we really want to stress the point that at least in terms of maternal labor supply, there was this huge difference, and that's a characteristic that nowadays we're really interested in because of the whole child penalty literature, and we know what it entails for women's careers. But yeah, we have a little bit more on that in the paper. Maybe in the next presentation I will put a few numbers. That's a very good idea.
Yeah. So Anna,
no, I think she answered. She already answered. Anna.
Okay. So
I want to add something that Anna was saying about the household work and the difference, because when I saw the pictures, I was thinking about nutrition and the effects on health about that.
That's another really interesting topic: consumption, nutrition.
Yes, I was thinking about that.
Yes,
how culture can affect
intra-household allocation.
Yes,
like mother.
But this is difficult to have this. It's difficult to have this data. The quality of food and some health outcomes about that.
That's a very good idea. Nobody has ever told me about it, but that's so true now that you mention it, with like the ready-made kind of like food. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe there is some data on like stunted growth or something. I don't know. I have no idea.
Maybe if you have something about the health measures or something, obesity or hypertension, something.
Yes. Really good.
Only I don't know what it's just something that I was thinking about another day, the difference, because we are always saying we are always talking about the egalitarian, the division of household work and everything, but something that usually demand a lot of time, it's cooking. And yes, but and then we want to, of course, we want to maximize, to reduce time, and maybe and it is something that maybe can have some consequence in health.
Yeah, there is a trade-off.
It's a trade-off.
Exactly.
Yes, the engineering of liberation that they
I that's a really nice idea. I absolutely have no idea. I also don't know any paper which has looked at that in the East-West German context. So.
Yes, but you need the data. That's the thing.
Yeah,
I
maybe
think,
from the there's the question.
Yes, I think
Dani
Dani Carusi has. She's writing here in the chat.
Is it possible any differences prior to reunification? Do you mean in the exact same outcomes that we did? So our data is because it's the West German kind of administrative data. We have it for West Germany before reunification, but we don't have it for East Germany before reunification because they had their own systems and it's not clear how reliable they are. And so basically we can't do the exact same comparison before reunification. But what we know is that many or most East German women returned after this 1 year because of the social pressure, right? So this was definitely the norm in East Germany, and then West Germans, often wouldn't return at all. Actually, that was very common. But for West Germans, we could compute it more concretely, the exact same measures that we have in the paper, but for East Germans, we kind of have to rely on the general statistics from East Germany. We don't have it in our data prior to reunification.
Is there any more questions? So I would like to thank very much Barbara for being here today. See you all on February 18th. We have we'll receive Giovanna Ubida from GeFam and INSPER. She will talk about domestic violence. Thank you again, Barbara. Hope to see you
so much
more times.
Thank you, Barbara. It was really great. Really,
it was
really
so
great.
much
Thank
fun
you
visiting
so
you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yes, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.